Welcome to the SBI Podcast, offering CEOs, sales and marketing leaders ideas to make the number.
Welcome, SBI Podcast listeners and video podcast viewers. My name is Dan Perry, and this is my good buddy, Eric Australia, E for short. And we're with SBI, a sales and marketing company dedicated to helping you make your number. On this web show and audio podcast, we'll feature topics and tutorials that will help you make your number. By tuning in, you can leverage emerging best practices and receive how-to instruction on some of the most prevalent go-to-market problems that exist in today's complex selling world. Did you ever wonder why some companies make their number every year and some struggle with consistent performance? Companies come to us every day and ask for help to get more consistency in making their number, but most don't even know where to start. And it starts with strategic alignment. So Eric, please define for us what strategic alignment is.
Absolutely, Dan. So strategic alignment begins with a clear understanding of the corporate strategy, followed by a grasp of the interdependencies among the various functional strategies. Functional strategies being product, marketing, sales, so on and so forth, talent included. So to truly be strategically aligned, you must link these internal strategies with the external market conditions, right? This has proven to be difficult. SBI has found that 91% of companies are misaligned. The main reason is the realization that companies really have tactics masquerading as strategy, right? This results in a lot of waste, or as we'd like to define it, thrashing, tons of work with very little productivity gains.
So on today's show, to fully understand strategic alignment, we must define and understand strategy versus tactics. We will define what they are, help you understand how you can implement them either effectively or efficiently, and explain a simple 2x2 model that will help you determine if your company is in position to make your number. Lately, there has been a renewed emphasis on strategy over tactics. The strategy versus tactics 2x2 model that we are going to discuss helps organizations realize where they are and what they need to do to improve.
So, developed by SBI, the strategy versus tactics model was created to help companies assess where they are and help get into strategic alignment. This is important. During our latest research, we found that there was only one commonality among the top 10% of organizations, and that is strategic alignment. To do this, we're going to be using SBI's revenue growth strategy titled How to Make Your Number 2016, and we're going to focus on page 5 of the report. And if you want a copy of this, go to salesbenchmarkindex.com/2016-report. And if you need somebody from SBI to come help you actually do this, you can actually go to salesbenchmarkindex.com/2016-workshop. So, Dan, let's get the ball rolling.
Awesome. All right, so the first item is to clearly define both strategy and tactics. So we're going to define these things and then give some examples of what they are and really what they're not. So strategy is defined as doing the right things, whereas tactics is doing things right. These two are interrelated because companies can be effective or ineffective at strategy and efficient or inefficient at tactics. Mixing these up can cause a company to clearly not grow at the level they want to. So let's break down the strategy versus tactics model so you fully understand it.
But just before we kind of break that down, so strategy, you said doing the right things.
Yep.
Like, what's an example of that?
So doing the right things would be if I set a strategy around product differentiation, for example. Doing the right things, if my strategy is product differentiation, which means my whole corporate alignment is around making sure my product is different and more valuable than my competitors. So my product team then tactically must execute upon making a differentiated product. My marketing team must attract people to my product by making sure that's a differentiated product. My sales team sells value through the product differentiation. And my talent strategy is to hire people who can articulate a value proposition through product differentiation.
Yeah, and even at a higher level, right? So choosing what markets to actually be in, that's a strategic decision. That's doing the right things, right? Versus tactics, which a lot of people confuse as strategy, which we alluded to earlier in the beginning of the segment, is, if we ask a sales leader as an example to give us his sales strategy, they'll hand you over a sales process document. That's not part of a strategy. That's a tactic executing on the strategy.
Correct. Now, you can actually be inefficient at tactics as well too. So your example, E, with the sales process, right? If your sales process doesn't articulate a value differentiation, might be a demonstration that's required in the sales process to make sure that the customer understands that value of the product and differentiation of the product, then you're out of alignment, right? You're being inefficient at your tactics, yet your strategy might be right.
Sure. That's a good example.
So before we go any further, though, we got to take a quick commercial break. So stick around, because when we come back, we're going to break down the strategy versus tactics model and show you how to plot your company on the model. And I think you're going to be interested, because I'm going to ask you questions and give you examples of companies, and I'm going to watch you plot them on our graph.
Are you going to put me on the spot here then?
Absolutely.
Huh?
Yeah. Should be fun.
Good.
Each day, you receive hundreds of emails, tons of text messages, countless telephone calls, and sit in too many meetings. How do you find ideas to make the number with all this noise? The SBI blog filters all this nonsense for you and presents only first-rate ideas to make the number. Simplify your life. Subscribe to one blog and read the best content. Go to salesbenchmarkindex.com and subscribe today.
Welcome back. I'm Dan Perry, and this is my good buddy, Eric Australia, better known as E, and we are with SBI. So today we are trying to help you make your 2016 number by explaining and showing you how to use SBI's strategy versus tactics 2x2 model. So to follow along at home, we're inside SBI's revenue growth strategy workbook titled How to Make Your Number in 2016. If you want a copy of this workbook, please go to salesbenchmarkindex.com/2016-report. Before the break, we defined strategy as doing the right things and tactics as doing things right. And a lot of companies, Eric, get these very confused. And we know that we can either be very effective or ineffective implementing the strategy and be very efficient or inefficient executing the tactics. But E, what does this mean to companies?
For those of you following along at home, you can actually see our quadrant, the 2x2 strategy versus tactics model up on screen, right? See, the horizontal axis has strategy, doing the right things. Vertical axis has tactics, doing things right. So in the upper left, you have die quickly, a poor plan executed brilliantly. Bottom left, you have die slowly, a poor plan executed poorly. And on the bottom right, you have survive, a brilliant plan executed poorly. And lastly, in the upper right-hand quadrant, you have thrive, a brilliant plan executed brilliantly, which is ideally where everybody wants to be, Dan.
Makes perfect sense, right? Simple, easy to use. So Eric, so we can get even deeper into this model and everyone completely understands it, can plot themselves, let's give some examples of companies in each quadrant so our audience can really understand what it means to thrive, survive, die quickly, or die slowly.
Yep.
I'll give you a well-known company, all right? And let's collaborate on where they are on the model. Is that fair?
That's totally fair. Should be good times.
Great. All right, so the first company I'm thinking about is AOL, the old American Online.
Okay.
So AOL was the company that really introduced the internet to the United States. And I remember back in the day when AOL was consistently sending me a CD-ROM every other week to install in my computer so that I could dial up the internet service. So based upon AOL and your knowledge of AOL, have you used it before?
I have.
Yep.
It was back in the day. I'm not quite as old as you are, so I do remember the CDs.
Okay, sharp one, Eric. Anyway, where would you place, though, AOL on our 2x2 strategy versus tactics model?
Yeah, it's fair. So I would actually put them probably in the die quickly, right? So if you think about it, so here's the reason, right? So you had the internet, which was blowing up, and they had a strategy to be in the internet, which is good, but it wasn't an effective way to actually attack the market. You had other organizations that were going straight, not dial up, right? You didn't have a subscription service. It was just a monthly overall thing. It wasn't used on a monthly payment basis, right? So it was a poor plan executed brilliantly because they were very efficient about it.
Now, I think it was at one point in time a thriving company, right?
Probably.
When the internet was new, and they were really the portal to go ahead and use the internet. So I would almost put them originally in the thrive category, right? A brilliant plan executed brilliantly that quickly jumped to die quickly.
Yeah, totally agree.
Now, why do you think AOL did that? What happened to their organization? Why they fall so fast, so quick?
Well, it's probably a lack of market intelligence, market research, alignment with the market, right? If they are tactically executing, that means they probably had alignment within their organization. But if they're not aligned to the market, how do buyers want to buy? How do your consumers want to consume your product? They probably missed the mark there.
Yeah. Again, place them in the die quickly, a quadrant, a poor plan executed brilliantly.
Yep.
That's good. All right, next one, okay?
Cool.
Let's take a kind of an easy one. And so the one that comes to mind right now, well, maybe it might be a little more difficult. I won't bias you. Let's talk about Sears.
Okay.
So if you think through Sears, right? So here's Sears, a great American company, started in the mail order catalog business back in the 1800s, probably the equivalent of the internet. They used the mail to sell their products and services. Then they transformed themselves when America was becoming more mobile. Cars were available back in the 40s and 50s. They became a department chain, right? Very successful department stores, probably arguably at the time the best one ever. And then what happened? So where would you put Sears in our 2x2 strategy versus tactics model?
Yeah, so I'm not, I don't know Sears history, but I'd say as of today, I'd put them in the die slowly, right? Which is a poor plan executed poorly, right? So what is it, right? So their strategy is really brick and mortar. So they're going against the internet, right? They're going against specialty big box retailers, such as Home Depot and Lowe's for their gardening tools and stuff like that.
Best Buy for their
electronics, right? So Macy's and JCPenney's and Nordstrom's for their clothes and everything like that, right? And they don't really effectively execute either, right? So, when are you getting information about Sears? I know you're not likely in their target market, but how are they executing? Probably poorly.
So it's very interesting at Sears. My daughter, who's 14 years old, we're walking through the shopping mall, believe it or not, and we decided to cut through Sears to get to our parking spot a lot quicker. As we walk into the store, my 14-year-old daughter says to me, "Dad, what is this? I've never been in here before." So she's 14 and have never been to a Sears store. Think about the change that they went from such a thriving organization and by missing market research to now really a dying slowly organization.
Yep.
So that's a good one. Okay, let's dive a little bit deeper and see if we can use the other two quadrants with our company examples. Yeah,
absolutely.
So the next company, Eric, that we should place on the strategy and tactics 2x2 model is Starbucks. Now this is a tougher one, right? And there's some bias around there what Starbucks might be, but where would you put them in the quadrant?
Yep. So I'd say survive.
Ooh. Okay.
Yeah. So here's why. Right. So obviously you have a brilliant strategy. They have the market cornered. Excuse me. On coffee, their whole retail chain, the whole 9 yards. Right. But they opened up stores too fast. Right. They allowed stores to probably decline in quality. Right. When was the last time you've been to Starbucks? It's dirtier than it was 10, 15 years ago.
Yep.
Right? So I challenge our audience to do the same. But when you're doing things that not doing things right, then it impacts your ability to execute, right? So again, brilliant strategy, doing the right things from a Starbucks perspective, but they're likely not doing them right. So therefore, they're in the survive category.
Yeah, no, I would argue with that, right? So I would say that they're in survive. I think Starbucks was a thriving company.
Oh, there's no doubt.
Right?
Yeah.
They lost their way. Their CEO left for a while, came back. They closed a bunch of stores. But I think they're on their way back to thrive.
Oh, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Now, why do you think, if you agree with that, why do you think that is?
Well, because if once they identify the things that they are not doing right, they fix them.
Yeah.
Right. So, and you've seen that probably recently, but they've closed the stores and now they're actually doing the right things by getting those stores that they do have in order. But they're just probably not there yet again.
So it's interesting. Starbucks is a company that until recently didn't do a lot of market research, has now done a ton of market research, and they're actually offering wine and beer now at a lot of their stores, right?
Yeah.
And that was, as we read about this, direct result of market research. So I'm seeing a common thread here, market research being very important, right, to
obviously
going back into the Thrive category if you're not there currently.
Yeah.
Right? All right. So before we tackle another one, I have another question for you, Eric. Do companies move between quadrants? I think that's an obvious question, but can you give me an example?
Well, I think we just gave you 3 examples, right? We talked about how all 3 companies were probably once in the Thrive category, at one point in their tenure, right? These movements are typically triggered by major events that happen, market conditions that change, new regulation, change in leadership and/or products. There's many reasons companies can change where they are in the strategy and tactics model. Let's use another example. Take Blackberry, right? RIM. Once the leader in smartphones, they quickly lost it. How? They weren't listening to the market, right? So they had the best business smartphone, if you will, on the market, but it didn't really translate well to consumers. So Apple did a better job of market research, figured out how to actually create their product and deploy it to where it solved a market problem. The perfect example is just putting a camera on your smartphone. Who would have thought, right? So I would move them from a thrive to die slowly. A poor plan executed poorly.
Yeah, that's interesting about BlackBerry. And I agree with you. So companies move all the time, all over the place, and they can move pretty quickly, too. It seems like it takes a long time to get into Thrive, or harder to get into Thrive. Maybe not a long time, but easy to lose that as you come out of there. Okay.
Yeah,
all right, Eric. One more company to place on our model.
Make me work here, Dan.
Exactly. Let's take a look at Amazon.com.
Okay.
Right? So as you know, Amazon has had record growth lately. Where would you place them in the 2x2 strategy versus tactics model?
Yeah, I'd say there's very few better companies as an example of a Thrive company, right? So it's a brilliant plan executed brilliantly, right? So they think about the investments they've made in AWS, Amazon Web Services, and taken over the cloud. That's a huge, huge investment. That's growing. That business is growing at approximately 80%. Don't quote me on that, but it should be in that realm. But they have a brilliant plan, right? They own e-commerce, and they execute it brilliantly. So therefore, that's just by definition, they're in the Thrive category.
Yeah. So again, common thread here. We know that Amazon does a ton of market research, understands the buyer and how they want to buy, and is able to really put a really soup to nuts in place from the front-end store to the back-end web services and the hosting of web services. They're a thriving organization right now.
Totally agree.
All right. So thanks, Eric. I think we explained the strategy versus tactics model well enough with the examples, right? And the customers and placing them on the grid. So the next step is to understand how organizations can move themselves from anything other than Thrive quadrant into where a brilliant plan is executed brilliantly. All right, so it's time for another quick short break, but we don't go anywhere. On the other side of this break, we're going to show you, again, what it takes to move into the Thrive quadrant on the model. All right.
You are watching SBI TV. This is a monthly web TV show featuring guests just like you, executives trying to grow their revenues. Each month, you can peek behind the scenes and watch your peers discuss their strategies for how they make their numbers. You are not going to want to miss this.
Welcome back. I'm Dan Perry, and this is my good buddy, Eric Australia, E for short, and we are with SBI. And today we are trying to help you make your 2016 number by explaining and showing you how to use SBI's strategy versus tactics 2x2 model. Now, to follow along at home, we're inside SBI's revenue growth strategy workbook titled How to Make Your Number in 2016. And if you want a copy of this workbook, please go to salesbenchmarkindex.com/2016-report. Now, before the break, we explained the strategy versus tactics 2x2 model and defined each of the 4 quadrants in the model. But really, I started to ask myself the question, right, Eric, why do you care? Why should someone care to actually go through all this effort to try to get into a Thrive quadrant, or even this academic approach of the model?
So I think the first thing is just identifying where you're actually residing within the model, right? So what this will do is tell you, okay, so if I'm a die slowly company, that means that I have strategy issues and tactical issues that I need to fix. But I'm a survive company, that means, okay, I'm tactically executing on a bad strategy, right? So
Yeah, absolutely.
So now I just need to actually just work on my strategy there.
Well, what we also found is this frequent and recent over-rotation to tactics. Don't get me wrong, right? Tactics are half of the equation. That's why it's a 2x2 grid, not a 4x4 grid, right? But this over-rotation into tactics, what we've seen, has really been you're working your butt off and you're just barely making the number.
Right.
So we advocate that because of this grid, the introduction of this grid, you should spend more time on strategy. You got to nail the strategy first, the brilliant plan, and then you can execute upon it efficiently.
Yeah, it's 50-50,
It
right?
is.
That's why it's 2x2 grid. It's tactics and strategy.
Well, the classic example here is the compensation plan, right?
Mm-hmm.
We all know that sales forces redo their comp plans yearly, and that's a pure tactic. Now, an important one, but it's pure tactic. But what's the strategy to actually redo the comp program? What's the strategy then the corporate product, marketing, sales, they're all in line, talent strategy, that we should redo our compensation plan to be in sync with the strategy?
Well, yeah, so the example is that a comp plan is a tactic, right? So I challenge the audience, right? If you're changing your comp plan on an annual basis, are you actually getting better results as a result of it? Probably not,
Yeah.
right? It's probably because your strategy is misaligned. And that tactic, although could be effective sometimes, is only that. It's a tactic. Right?
So we're going to understand what it takes to move into the Thrive quadrant now. But if the reason why you care about this is that if you think your organization is not in the Thrive category, that you're over-rotating on tactics, you need to invest some time, or you need to grab your boss by the throat, so to speak, and get some time in and nail that strategy, because it's probably misaligned, and you're probably on that left-hand side an ineffective strategy. Even though you might be executing it great, you're not going to hit Thrive.
Yeah, it's causing you pain, right?
Yeah.
You're probably working 80 hours a week and barely making your number, just like you said.
So, for us to understand how to move into the Thrive quadrant, it takes strategic alignment. This involves commitment from the company. This is a commitment from the CEO and through each functional executive leadership to get strategically aligned. It just doesn't happen naturally. So, Eric, companies first need to understand where they are currently stand, right, through an assessment of each of the corporate and functional strategies. They need to realize what steps they need to take to improve and how to begin the journey and what it looks like along the way. So the best way to do this, we think, is to have each functional leader complete the revenue growth strategy workbook. By answering or not answering the questions in the workbook, an accurate assessment and prioritized roadmap can be built to move an organization out of either die quickly, die slowly, or survive, and get into the Thrive quadrant.
Yeah, so that's good, Dan. So a couple points to think about when conducting this assessment. First, you have to be objective, right? You have to be. So don't drink your own Kool-Aid. Get differing opinions from completing each question to ensure you've been exhaustive in your analysis. The best we've seen is to get all the functional leaders together and go through each function, including corporate, and then collectively plot yourself on the grid, right? And then the funny thing is that I guarantee you'll have different people plotting themselves on different points in the grid.
Yeah. Eric, some of the workshops that we've attended with organizations, again, we go around the room and ask the question, where do you plot yourself on the grid? And we then get various answers from die slowly to thrive to survive. I mean, there was one who nailed every single bucket or every single quadrant. And that really tells me that they don't have a strategy. They're definitely ineffective in doing the right things. And now it's a question of, are they doing things right, but those things that they're doing are the wrong things to do?
Yep.
Second, don't just do it in your function, but across functions. Are they linked together? Is the marketing guy pointing fingers at the sales guy, he can't sell anything, and the sales guy says the marketing guy can't give me any leads, right? This will help you think about what is needed to execute the corporate and functional strategy and get them aligned. So this means when you plot yourself on the grid, it looks at the interlink between the functions and not just in a silo. This is the only way we can be successful identifying where you are. And finally, Eric, don't forget about market research that is needed. We talked about this, right? You cannot develop your strategies without external information about the market, accounts, buyers, and users of your products and services. If you can't get this done internally, look for outside help. Or go to one of our workshops, right? If you're interested, you can sign up for a workshop at salesbenchmarkindex.com/2016-workshop.
All right, Dan, so progressing from stage to stage takes time. This time involves not just documenting, but implementing the strategies. We too often have seen executive teams give up when it gets tough during implementation and progressing to the Thrive quadrant. But this is the time when absolute focus is needed most. The benefits are worth the effort in shareholder return.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So we're out of time today. I had fun giving examples of companies placing them in the quadrant, and I hope our audience learned about the 2x2 strategy versus tactics model. So we'd like to thank you, our viewers, for tuning in. If you enjoyed this show, I suggest you subscribe to SBI TV at salesbenchmarkindex.com/TV, or you can find us at our SBI YouTube channel. We've got some outstanding content coming in future episodes that you will not want to miss. So until then, Eric and I wish you the best of luck as you try and make your number.
This has been the SBI Podcast. For more information on SBI services, case studies, the SBI team and how we work, or to subscribe to our other offerings, please visit us at salesbenchmarkindex.com.